Hey everyone, before we dive in, please hit that subscribe button to join our community for more stories that inspire and uplift. Now, let's get to it. I'm Rear Admiral Evelyn Lockcatch, and for much of my life, my father presented me as the one flaw he couldn't mold into perfection. I believed that if I pushed myself hard enough, suffered in silence, and triumphed boldly, he'd finally notice me. But that evening, beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Rosemore Club, as champagne flutes clinked and applause lingered, he made it clear to everyone that I'd never be what he envisioned. He tapped the microphone twice, the sound sharp like a verdict. His chuckle came first, polished and hollow. Then came the sting, cloaked in humor. He called me his greatest letdown. The room didn't flinch. They laughed, relieved by the jest, even though it carried my name. I stayed still at table 9, back rigid, hands clasped in my lap, dressed in the navy blue gown he once said screamed too much ambition. The laughter faded into uneasy murmurs. A few glances darted my way. One woman offered a sympathetic smile. Like a bandage, she didn't want to press too close to the wound. The band fussed with their instruments. My mother sipped her wine, eyes steady. Then the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy. Silverware clinked nervously. A sudden gust swept through the balcony doors, followed by the unmistakable roar of helicopter blades slicing the night. Glasses trembled. Napkins fluttered wildly. Guests rose, peering into the darkness. A black SUV screeched onto the lawn, its headlights piercing the party's glow. A woman emerged from the passenger side, clad in a sharp black suit, earpiece in place, credentials gleaming under the lights. Her eyes locked on mine. She crossed the room with purpose, a sealed envelope in hand. When she reached me, she leaned in, her voice low and clear. "The president needs you now." My father's face fell. A fork hit the floor. The laughter died. I rose deliberately, not for drama, but to let the moment sink in. Every second stretched, etching itself into the stunned faces around me. I adjusted my dress cuffs and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The air shifted again, not from the wind, but from the weight of something undeniable taking shape. The agent held the door. I passed my father without a glance. He didn't deserve one. The silence that followed wasn't reverence. It was shock. This wasn't the story they'd expected. This was something entirely new. I stepped into the night, boots crunching across the grass. Behind me, the party stood still, caught in the echo of one man's words and the rise of one woman claiming her place. Our home was always quiet, not with calm, but with a tension that demanded obedience. The air felt strict, as if it enforced its own rules, and even the floorboards creaked like they were standing at attention. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His presence alone reshaped the energy of every space. Dinner was at 1800 hours, no exceptions. Forks touched plates without a sound, and words stayed tightly scripted. Emotions weren't banned, they were simply irrelevant. You could shed tears if you were injured, but only for a moment. Any hint of vulnerability met a cold, leveling stare that made you shrink and stand taller all at once. His boots sat under the coat rack, aligned precisely at a 45-degree angle, like sentries awaiting orders. The thermostat was fixed, the curtains drawn, the mail organized. Order wasn't just preferred, it was sacred. I learned early that perfection was demanded, not celebrated. A 98 on a test prompted questions about the missing 2 points. I worked tirelessly for his approval, lining up my shoes, pressing my clothes, memorizing the military alphabet by 9. But no matter how crisp my edges or how shiny my shoes, I always fell short. Being good wasn't enough. I had to be the version of himself he wished he'd become. And he didn't believe girls got second chances. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me with a distant, puzzled look, as if I'd wandered into the wrong family. I wasn't angry then, just lost. I thought love meant becoming sharper, faster, better. Only later did I see that his affection came with conditions I'd spent my childhood failing to meet. My mother glided through the house like a gentle breeze in a locked room. Where my father imposed structure, she offered reprieve. She didn't defy him, but her presence softened the edges. A community college literature professor, she carried the scent of paper and lilac. Her sweater shifted with the seasons, warm oranges in autumn, soft blues in spring. On days when my father's silence pressed too heavily, she'd slip $1 into my coat for the school book fair or tuck a cookie into my lunch, wrapped in wax paper. She rarely spoke of the strain in our home, but when I sat too still at the table, carrying my shame, she'd join me, pour tea, and recite Dickinson or Angelou like she was handing me a map. "Storm," she whispered once, after I clutched the weight of a failed spelling test. "You're built for bigger wins than this." When my father was away on reserve duty, she'd let me drift off on the couch beside her as she graded papers, the TV murmuring, her hand resting lightly on my head like a quiet comma. She couldn't break the rules, but she cushioned the spaces between them. In a world where everything was earned, she gave freely. I didn't see it then, but she was my first lesson that strength could be soft, that making room for someone's spirit was as commanding as ruling a room. Everything I am began in the safety of her silence. At 15, I started rising before dawn. While the house slept, I slipped out the back door in worn sneakers, running loops around the block under flickering streetlights. The air smelled of dew and asphalt, and each step carried me closer to Annapolis. No one knew what I was chasing, not even my father, who thought discipline only mattered if he ordered it. I did push-ups behind my locked bedroom door, counted sit-ups in whispers, and hid Naval Academy brochures between algebra pages. At night, I studied parade formations like they were keys to a new existence. My mother never spoke of it directly, but she began leaving bananas on the counter and refilling the water bottle I always forgot. Once, she slid an old stopwatch across the table without comment, then returned to her essays as if nothing had happened. That was her way, supporting me quietly, never in his sight, always in mine. Some mornings, when I returned breathless and damp from fog, she'd be at the sink, sleeves rolled up, a steady presence in a house bound by silence. She didn't ask how far I'd run. She'd hand me a towel, her hand brushing my shoulder for an extra beat, a silent pact sealed in warmth. I didn't know what lay ahead, only that I wanted something that was mine. Each push-up was a small defiance, carving away the version of me I was told to be. I didn't need his nod. I needed the strength to build without it. When I asked my father for a recommendation letter, he didn't shout. He just looked at me like I'd requested his blessing to fail. He set down his coffee, folded his newspaper, and said he wouldn't help me chase a future I couldn't grasp. I didn't argue. I nodded, left, and asked my calculus teacher instead. I mailed my application with trembling hands, but no hesitation. Then I trained harder, longer. His refusal didn't break me, it honed me. When I failed the mile on my first physical test, I didn't cry in public. I walked home in the rain and ran it again that night until my lungs screamed and the stopwatch granted me redemption. I passed the next week by 2 seconds that rewrote my story. Every stumble became evidence I could move forward without cheers. The silence at home no longer shook me. It faded into background noise behind my own breath. I didn't need him to open the door. I just needed the strength to push it myself. The sand burned underfoot, even at night, and the sky thrummed with the tension of an approaching storm. We were moving supplies through a tight corridor when chaos erupted. Gunfire tore from the ridge. 2 men fell, one screaming, one silent. I didn't hesitate. I ran low, lungs searing, boots slipping in dust. One of our own had a bullet through his thigh, blood pooling fast. I cinched my belt around his leg, pressed my elbow into the wound, and dragged him 40 yards behind a rusted container as bullets shredded the metal above us. He kept asking if we'd survive. I didn't reply. I kept my head down, voice calm, counting breaths like currency I could trade for time. When the medevac chopper landed, my side was slick with his blood and mine. I didn't feel the shrapnel until we were in the air. I refused the stretcher and walked off the field to show them I could. Recognition didn't come with fanfare or medals. It came 2 days later when Torres, the unit's toughest, handed me the mission brief with a nod. No words needed. After that, they followed me, not by order, but because they knew I'd hold steady when everything crumbled. That mission didn't make me a hero. It made me seen. For the first time, my authority wasn't a badge on my uniform. It was trust they could bet their lives on. I never forgot what it took to earn that. I rose slowly, not out of necessity, but because the moment demanded weight. The room was still. Champagne glasses paused, forks suspended. My father gripped the microphone, but no words came. His face shifted from smug to blank, as if the ground had tilted beneath him. I smoothed my dress, adjusted my purse strap, and let the silence carry the weight. I didn't look at him, I didn't need to. His eyes followed me, sharp with confusion, while the crowd saw something they hadn't anticipated. I wasn't the disappointment anymore. I was the 1S. Ummoned. Outside, the night hummed with urgency. Helicopter blades carved the air. Spotlights bathed the lawn in gold and green. Napkins fluttered like white flags. The agent waited by the open door, headset on, stance unwavering. I passed the string quartet, the floral centerpieces, the clinking glasses, and every person who'd ever pitied me. At the threshold, I paused, not for show, but to breathe. The kind of breath you take before stepping into something permanent. Then I moved forward. The wind caught my dress. The rotor's roar swallowed the party behind me. The agent handed me a headset. I slipped it on without a word. Her briefing was sharp. Intelligence breach, Atlantic corridor, executive level alert. A mission that wouldn't wait. I nodded once. She signaled the crew. The helicopter dipped, and the crew chief grabbed my arm, pulling me aboard with practiced ease. Inside, the noise became rhythm. The harness snapped into place. The door slammed shut. Through the window, the banquet hall shrank into a glowing box framed in glass. My father stood in the doorway, mouth slightly agape, mic lowered but not set down. I leaned back, closed my eyes for a single second, not to rest, but to anchor the moment. This wasn't vengeance. It was my arrival. Everything I'd carried, all the silent struggles, had led here. Without raising my voice, I'd spoken the loudest truth of all. The letter arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, but I recognized his handwriting before I broke the seal. The words were careful, deliberate, as if he'd rewritten them multiple times. He didn't beg forgiveness. He asked for a conversation. He wrote that he stayed outside the banquet because he didn't know how to sit among people who saw in me what he'd refused to acknowledge. He said he didn't salute, not because I hadn't earned it, but because he no longer knew how to honor what he couldn't comprehend. Then he asked to meet. We chose the cemetery where my mother rests. The grass was neatly cut, the breeze steady and low. He wore a windbreaker and jeans, nothing crisp or formal. I arrived in uniform, not to make a point, but because it was me. He looked up, and for the first time in years, his eyes softened. We didn't discuss medals, the banquet, or my missions. We spoke of her, how she read poetry on rainy days and hummed while stirring soup. He admitted he'd tried to raise a soldier and had no blueprint for raising a storm. I stayed silent. Sometimes silence lets truth settle. When it was time to part, he stood slowly, shoulders heavy with age, not regret. Then, without a word, he raised a salute, imperfect, slow, a little unsteady, but real. I returned it not because he'd reclaimed the lost years, but because he'd finally chosen to see them. That was enough. Healing doesn't always come cleanly. Sometimes it starts with uneven edges. I didn't share the story to prove a point, not to justify my rank, my missions, or the weight of the insignia on my chest. I shared it because I know what it's like to carry silence where validation should have been. There are people out there right now striving for a nod they may never receive, turning rejection into strength, showing up daily without applause. I see you because I was you. Not everyone gets the apology or the salute. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is build a life so rooted in truth that their denial no longer shapes you. That's what I did, not to spite my father, but to stop needing his approval as my proof. I've learned that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet choice made 1,000 times to keep moving forward when no one's watching. And when the world finally notices, you're not surprised, you're ready. So if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told to stay small, ask yourself, when did you stop waiting for permission? When did you start becoming who you were meant to be? Share your turning point below. Your story might be the spark someone needs. And if you want more stories of truth, fire, and quiet triumphs stay with me. We rise together,